Hello, my name is Julia, and I'm going to be talking about anthropogenic impacts on wetland ecosystems and their waterbirds on the island of Oahu. First, wetland ecosystems. I will be discussing biodiversity, wetland birds, bioshields, wetland loss and protection, and rehabilitation. So just to touch on species diversification and endemism in the Hawaiian Islands, post-colonization, isolation is a huge factor that has contributed to a lot of this diversification and rate of endemism. So wetlands are one of the most productive ecosystems on the planet, especially in terms of their nutrient supply. And they provide a crucial habitat for native and endemic species. And a lot of these species, endemic species, are now extinct or endangered. However, they continue to provide a habitat for species such as fish, birds, damselflies, and dragonflies, just to name a few. They are very crucial to the survival of native waterbirds in particular. Wetlands are threatened by invasive species, urbanization, and development. So these are the main four endangered water birds that are native to Hawaii that I'll be briefly discussing today. This is the Hawaiian moorhen, the Hawaiian stilt, the Hawaiian coot, and the Hawaiian duck. Just to briefly discuss bioshields, or what I've termed here nature's bioshield. Wetlands aid with storm-induced flooding. They can also store excess floodwater and slow the rate at which it impacts surrounding areas. Maybe some of the detriments or negative impacts to think about is sediment and pollutants that may get trapped inside of the marsh or wetland. Excess nutrients can be washed into the marsh, especially from fertilizers, from agriculture, or from neighborhood use of pesticides, things like that. So before European contact, it is said that there was 110,000 acres of wetland, and this was roughly 1778. We have lost 7,000 acres since then, and this has been mostly on the island of Oahu. These resources that I've found said that 65% has been lost by our best calculations. And this has been due mainly to development and urbanization. Land has been filled and built upon. Waikiki also used to be a substantial wetland, and now it is a substantial resort area and a popular destination instead. Kaneohe Bay has also lost 58% of the original wetland area. Okay, so just to further go into this more in relation to wetlands that we still have on the island, Pulu Wetland, which is located near what's now known as Enchanted Lake in Kailua. This marsh and pond was once very extensive and had hundreds of acres of wetland and pond, which was home to a lot of native species, and since then it has been extensively developed, starting in the 1960s. And just to demonstrate this, we have a map here that shows in the light blue underneath was the former pond area, and the light green on the map shows former wetland area, and current pond levels are demonstrated in the dark blue, and the bright green show where the current wetland areas are. So just to go back to Waikiki, I had a very difficult time finding any really genuinely good photos or photos at all that document Waikiki near this time period of like the early 1920s. However, I did find this one, which is really depicts what Waikiki used to look like very well. As you can see over here, Diamond Head, which is fairly easy to pinpoint if you're familiar with it. And this photo is said to be roughly around the area of Macaulay and Date Street in 1926. And this shows clearly, you can see all of the wetland area that we obviously no longer see. And just to put this into context, I wanted to show you what this same region, they were claiming that this photo was taken Macaulay and Date Street, so I've pinpointed that on this map just to show you what that area looks like now, regardless of whether that is the exact location of the photo. This whole area has been heavily urbanized, as you can see. So protection and rehabilitation, a lot of this has been major wins for wetlands in Hawaii. So habitats have been managed better now and protected. Some habitats have been created or former wetlands have been restored. Control measures have been implemented for predators. There have been a lot of issues with things such as cats, mongoose, obviously rats have always been an issue, and other invasive species. Obviously the mallard is an invasive species when you're considering the kaloa, the Hawaiian duck, and also water management. They've implemented some water management techniques to try to make sure that the harm done to wetlands is as minimal as possible. Challenges here, it's kind of challenging to calculate what is still healthy habitat. As far as research efforts go, a lot of studies and articles that I was finding were saying, although they could conclude that there were much more healthy habitats in general, they also could not easily calculate what is and what is not healthy. There's no distinct markers. Obviously, you have the markers of native versus invasive species present at a site, but sometimes there are gray areas that have some natives and some invasives. So this is kind of an area that needs further research. Invasive species tend to be resilient and highly adaptable. I think we all know this for any invasive that we've discussed or learned about. Most invasives tend to be very adaptable to changes in habitat and have a competitive advantage versus natives, which do not. So another great one is Kawainui Marsh. This is the largest emergent wetland left in Hawaii. So that's why I wanted to really show this one, because I think it's definitely an example of a wetland that has been restored in so many ways and made better than it was previously, although I'm sure this was at one point really amazing wetland. So Kawainui Marsh, restoration projects for this were mostly done by the DLNR and DOFA. They improved 80 acres of marsh. Most of their improvements were funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, the Castle Foundation, and DOFA. And for those that aren't sure, DLNR is the Department of Land and Natural Resources. And DOFA is the Division of Forestry and Wildlife. So 60 acres are set aside of what has been improved, and those are reserved for Hawaiian waterbirds and other organisms that live in this habitat, including migratory birds. And the other 20 acres they have reforested with native trees and native plants. And they've also set aside some for recreation and education purposes. I know personally, as someone who's volunteered, DLNR does a lot of work educating students. So I do think that they do a lot of education things in this marsh area. Okay, so they've restored a lot of vital wetland area. They also implemented measures to control erosion, which can be a huge issue if you have, especially like things like nutrient enrichment and eutrophication or algal blooms, which can be harmful to fish and marine organisms, or in this case, you know, things that are living in the pond may be harmed. So they've improved the overall habitat for native and endangered species such as waterbirds, migratory shorebirds, native fish, and native plants. Oops. Another win for us with wetlands is there has been an increase in population size in the past 3 decades on Oahu for these three these 3 endangered waterbirds. This is the stilt, the moorhen, and the coot. These findings have coincided with wetland protection efforts. So this is a really big point to make, that the protection efforts that we have been implementing are actually working. So the growth has likely peaked. They've seen a slower number of increased populations in recent years, which probably means that there's not enough habitat for these populations to expand. And also they've seen that the wetlands, or the islands that have less protection of wetlands, have lower populations of these birds, meaning that our efforts on islands like Oahu really are meaningful. So furthermore, while some native species indicate a preference to very specific habitat conditions, one study said that species such as the stilt have been suggested to live in habitats that were previously uncommon for them. These would be what we would term like unhealthy ecosystems, such as like areas that are just temporary ponds of water or pools of water. They're not healthy wetlands or marshes. So these were previously uncommon. So this kind of gives us some hope that some of these species may be adaptable enough to prevail despite wetland degradation. Finally, my conclusions. Wetland ecosystems do play a vital role in Hawaiian ecology. Wetland habitats have suffered from land use changes and urbanization, and wetland protection efforts do work, and I think that's maybe the main takeaway here, that we really need to continue to try and protect these ecosystems. So we need to share knowledge of wetland ecosystems and work to protect, restore, and create more of them. And this should really show a significant ecological impact for the future. Thank you.